Sergeant Marcus Cole never wanted to be a hero. He joined the United Terran Marines because Earth needed soldiers, and because the pay was good enough to send money back to his mother on the colony world of New Bristol. He was 29 years old, and had spent 8 of those years fighting in conflicts across human space. He had seen friends die and enemies fall, and through it all he had remained the same quiet and stubborn man who believed in doing his job and nothing more. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place filled with alien empires that had existed for thousands of years before humans ever left their home world. One of the largest was the Dominion of the Eternal Throne, which controlled over 300 star systems and was ruled by an Empress who had lived for more than 3 centuries. Dominion had always viewed humans as a young and primitive species, barely worth noticing, but that changed when a rebel faction called the Shattered Sun attacked the human supply convoy passing through neutral space. 400 human civilians died in that attack, including children and families traveling to new colony worlds. The Shattered Sun did not apologize because they did not care about the opinions of what they considered lesser beings. They were too busy fighting their civil war against the Dominion and trying to capture the Empress. Civilith, who represented everything they hated about the old regime. What they did not expect was humanity's response. The United Terran government did not send diplomats or strongly worded messages. They sent warships. Within 3 weeks, a human battle fleet appeared at the edge of Dominion space and requested permission to hunt down the Shattered Sun forces responsible for the massacre. The Dominion was shocked, but they were also desperate. Their civil war had been going badly, and the Shattered Sun had just captured Empress Civilith herself during a surprise attack on her personal vessel. She was being held on a moon called Vethkara Prime, where the rebels planned to execute her on a live broadcast to break the spirit of her remaining supporters. The Dominion agreed to let the humans help. Marcus and his squad were part of the ground assault force sent to extract the Empress. Before the execution could take place, they landed under heavy fire with plasma bolts lighting up the dark sky like deadly fireworks. The Shattered Sun had fortified the moon heavily, and they were not going to give up their prize without a fight. Marcus watched 2 of his squad mates die in the first 10 minutes when a plasma cannon tore through their transport vehicle. He pulled the survivors into cover and led them toward the detention facility where intelligence said the Empress was being held. The fighting was brutal and close, and nothing like the clean battles shown in recruitment videos. They pushed through corridor after corridor, losing people along the way. By the time Marcus reached the detention level, he was alone. His squad was gone, and his armor was cracked in 3 places, and he was running on combat stimulants and pure stubbornness. Kicked open the door to the high-security cell, expecting to find a broken and frightened prisoner. Instead, he found her Empress Civilith stood 7 feet tall, with silver-blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Her eyes were large and dark, with flecks of gold that looked like dying stars. She wore tattered robes that had once been magnificent, and even after days of captivity, she held herself with the dignity of someone who had ruled an empire. She looked at Marcus with an expression somewhere between contempt and curiosity. "You are human," she said, and the way she spoke made the words sound like an insult. Marcus checked his rifle and counted his remaining ammunition, which was not much. "And you are the package," he replied without looking at her. "We can exchange cultural notes later, but right now we need to move." "Package," she repeated with clear offense in her voice. "I am the Empress of the Eternal Throne, and you will address me with proper respect." "With respect, Your Majesty, the people trying to kill you are about 30 seconds behind me. So unless you want to die with proper titles, we need to go now." She stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus wondered if she was going to refuse just to prove a point, but then she nodded once and moved toward the door with a grace that seemed impossible for someone her size. "Very well, human," she said. "Lead the way." They moved through the facility as alarms screamed around them and the sounds of battle echoed from every direction. Marcus led her through maintenance corridors and service tunnels that the shattered sun had not bothered to guard properly. He had memorized the facility layout before the mission, and that preparation was now saving both their lives. The Empress followed him in silence, but he could feel her watching him and judging every decision he made. She had commanded armies and ruled planets, and being led by a single human soldier was clearly not something she was comfortable with. They reached a junction where two corridors met, and Marcus held up his fist to signal a stop. He listened carefully and heard the sound of boots approaching. From the left, this way, he whispered and pulled her toward the right corridor. That path leads to the outer sections, she said. There is no extraction point in that direction. The extraction point got blown up 20 minutes ago, Marcus replied. We are improvising now. Improvising. She said the word like it was something distasteful. Your species truly has no concept of proper planning. Our species is the one rescuing you right now, so maybe save the criticism for later. She fell silent again, but Marcus thought he saw something flicker in her strange eyes. It might have been anger, or it might have been something else entirely. They made it to an emergency airlock that led to the frozen surface of the moon. Marcus checked his suit seals and handed the Empress a spare breathing mask from his pack. It is going to be cold out there, he warned her. About -60, and the wind will cut right through those robes. I have survived worse, she replied. Good, because we have 12 kilometers to cover before we reach the backup extraction zone. 12 kilometers, she repeated. In this environment, unless you have a better idea, Your Majesty. She did not. Marcus opened the airlock and the cold hit them like a physical blow. He stepped out onto the frozen wasteland of Vethkar Prime with an alien Empress behind him and an army of enemies searching for them. He did not know if they would survive the night, but he knew that he was going to try, because that was what humans did. They tried even when the odds were impossible, and sometimes against all logic they succeeded. The frozen surface of Vethkar Prime stretched out before them like an endless sea of white and gray. Marcus kept his head down against the wind and pushed forward step by step while the Empress followed close behind him. Her species was more resistant to cold than humans, but even she was struggling against the brutal conditions. The wind carried tiny particles of ice that stung any exposed skin, and the temperature was dropping further as the moon rotated away from its parent planet. Marcus checked his navigation display and calculated that they had covered about 3 kilometers in the first 2 hours. 9 more to go. How are you holding up? He asked without stopping. I am fine, the Empress replied, though her voice was strained. Do not concern yourself with my well-being. You are my mission, Your Majesty, so your well-being is exactly what I am concerned with. She did not respond to that. They walked in silence for another hour before Marcus spotted a dark shape ahead that turned out to be the entrance to an old mining tunnel. We rest here, he said. 15 minutes out of the wind. We should keep moving, the Empress argued. Every moment we delay gives our enemies more time to find us. If we collapse from exhaustion, we are not going to outrun anyone, Marcus replied. 15 minutes. He led her into the tunnel, and they moved far enough inside to escape the worst of the cold. Marcus pulled out a small heating unit from his pack and activated it, creating a tiny zone of warmth. In the frozen darkness, the Empress watched him work with those strange, golden-flecked eyes. Your tactics are crude, she observed as he set up a simple alarm sensor at the tunnel entrance. My generals would never approve of such improvised methods. Your generals are not here, Marcus replied. And crude tactics got you out of that cell, so maybe they are not as bad as you think. Confidence, she said. Your species seems to have an abundance of it, despite your obvious limitations. What limitations would those be? You are small and fragile compared to most galactic species, and your technology is centuries behind the Dominions. And you have only been traveling among the stars for a few generations. Marcus finished setting up the sensor and sat down against the tunnel wall. All true, he admitted. But here we are anyway. Yes, the Empress said with something like confusion in her voice. Here you are. She sat down across from him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The heating unit hummed softly between them, casting a faint red glow that made the ice crystals on the walls sparkle. Why did your people come? She finally asked. This civil war has nothing to do with humanity, and you have no alliance with the Dominion, and there is nothing here that benefits your species. Marcus thought about the question before answering. The shattered sun killed 400 of our people, including kids who had never done anything to anyone. But that was the shattered sun, the Empress pressed. Not the Dominion, and certainly not me personally, so why risk your lives to save mine? Because someone needed help, and we can help, Marcus said simply. That is how humans think about these things. That is absurd, the Empress replied. No rational species expends resources and lives without a clear strategic benefit. Then I guess humans are not rational. He pulled out a ration pack and tore it open before offering half to Hirsch. Looked at the compressed nutrition bar with obvious distaste, but took it anyway. What is this substance? She asked. Technically food, Marcus said. It tastes like cardboard, but it keeps you alive. She took a small bite, and her expression confirmed his description. This is what your soldiers survive on. This is what I have been eating for 8 years, Your Majesty. That is. She paused, searching for the right word. Dedication. Or stubbornness, Marcus replied. Depending on who you ask. They ate in silence, and when the 15 minutes were up, Marcus packed his gear, and they resumed their journey across the frozen wasteland. Hours blended together into an endless march against the wind and cold somewhere. Around the 7th kilometer, the Empress stumbled and nearly fell. Marcus caught her arm and steadied her without comment. I am fine, she insisted. I know, he said, but the ground is uneven here, so watch your step. He did not mention that she was clearly exhausted or that her movements had been slowing for the past hour. He simply adjusted his pace to match hers and kept them moving toward the extraction point. You have not complained once, the Empress observed later as they climbed a ridge of frozen rock. Not about the cold or the distance or the danger. Complaining does not change anything, Marcus replied. Might as well save the energy. My advisors complain constantly, she said, about everything from policy decisions to the temperature of their quarters. That must be annoying. You have no idea, Marcus thought. He almost heard something like humor in her voice. They reached the top of the ridge and looked down at the valley below where the backup extraction zone waited. It was still 3 kilometers away, but they could see the signal beacon blinking in the darkness. Almost there, Marcus said. Almost, the Empress agreed then. The first plasma bolt screamed past them and exploded against the rocks behind them. Marcus grabbed the Empress and pulled her down into cover as more shots filled the air. They found us, he said unnecessarily. I noticed, she replied. Marcus looked back and saw lights approaching from the direction they had come. A shattered sun patrol must have picked up their trail somewhere along the way. There were at least a dozen of them. And they were moving fast. New plan, Marcus said. You run for the extraction point, and I hold them here. That is suicide, the Empress said. Maybe, but it gives you a chance to get out. I am not leaving you to die human. My name is Marcus, he said. And you are the Empress of 300 star systems, so your life matters more than mine. She stared at him with an expression he could not read. You truly believe that, she said. It is just math, Your Majesty. My name is Sivaleth, she replied. And your math is wrong. More plasma bolts struck the rocks around them, and Marcus knew they were out of time. Raised his rifle and prepared to make his last stand. But the Empress had other plans. She reached out and touched something on her wrist. and a hidden communicator came to life with a burst of static. "This is Empress Civilith," she said into the device. "Emergency beacon activated, and I am requesting immediate extraction at these coordinates." Voice crackled back through the static. "Your Majesty, we have your signal and Loyalist forces are inbound with arrival in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Marcus smiled grimly. "I can hold for 4 minutes," he said, and he did. The first enemy soldier came over the ridge, and Marcus shot him through the chest. The second and third followed immediately after, and Marcus dropped them both with precise bursts from his rifle behind him. Civilith crouched in the shelter of a large boulder, watching with wide eyes as the human held the line. The shattered sun forces spread out and tried to flank his position, but Marcus had chosen his ground well. There was only one approach that offered decent cover, and he had a clear field of fire across every other angle. He killed the fourth and fifth enemies as they tried to rush him from the left. The sixth managed to get closer before Marcus put a round through his helmet. "There are too many," Civilith shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "You cannot hold them all." "Watch me," Marcus replied. He switched to his sidearm when his rifle ran dry and kept firing. The seventh enemy fell, and then the eighth and ninth. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder and burned through his armor. But Marcus barely flinched. He shot the soldier who had hit him and then turned to engage two more coming from the right. Civilith had seen warriors from a dozen species fight over her long centuries of rule. She had watched the legendary champions of the Void Guard battle against impossible odds. She had witnessed the great generals of her empire lead armies across star systems. None of them fought like this human. It was not his skill that amazed her, though he was clearly well trained. It was not his weapons, which were primitive by galactic standards. It was something else entirely, something that she could not name but could see burning in his eyes every time he took aim. He simply refused to stop. A blast caught him in the leg, and he stumbled, but did not fall. He shifted his weight and kept firing, taking down another enemy with a shot that should have been impossible given his wounds. Blood was soaking through his armor in multiple places now, and his breathing was ragged and harsh, but still he fought. "Fall back," Civilith called to him. "Take cover and let me try to negotiate." "Negotiate with people who want to execute you." Marcus laughed grimly. "Not happening, Your Majesty. You are dying." "Not yet." He reloaded his sidearm with hands that were steady despite the pain and the blood loss. The next wave of enemies came, and Marcus met them with the same relentless determination. 15 enemies dead, now and then 20, and the shattered sun forces were starting to hesitate. They had expected to overwhelm a single wounded human in seconds. Instead, they were losing soldiers faster than they could advance. One of their officers shouted something in a language Civilith recognized as a retreat order. They were falling back to regroup and call for reinforcements. Marcus used the brief pause to check his ammunition. 3 rounds left. He looked back at Civilith with a tired smile. "How long until extraction?" he asked. 2 minutes, she replied. "Perhaps less." "Good," he said, "because I am running low on bullets." He turned back to watch the enemy position, and Civilith found herself staring at his back. This human had killed more than 20 enemy soldiers while wounded and outnumbered and outgunned. He had done it without hesitation or complaint. He had done it for her, even though she had treated him with contempt and criticized his methods and questioned his intelligence. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. Marcus did not turn around. "Why what? Why do you fight so hard? For someone you do not know and who has given you nothing but disrespect." "You are the mission," he replied, "and I finish my missions." "That is not a real answer." He was quiet for a moment. "When I was a kid, my father told me something that stuck with me," he finally said. "He said that anyone can fight when the odds are good, but what matters is what you do when the odds are bad, because that is when you find out who you really are." "And who are you?" Marcus Cole Just a stubborn human who does not know when to quit. The sound of engines filled the air, and Sivillith looked up to see Dominion dropships descending from the dark sky. Cavalry had arrived. Marcus lowered his weapon and let out a long breath. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed. Onto the frozen ground, Sivillith moved faster than she had ever moved before. She caught him before he hit the rocks and held him in her arms as the dropships landed around them. "Stay awake," she commanded him. "That is an Imperial order." "Yes, Your Majesty." He mumbled with his eyes half closed. Medical teams rushed toward them, and Sivillith reluctantly let them take him from her arms. She watched as they loaded him onto a stretcher and carried him toward one of the ships. A Dominion officer approached her and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, we are relieved beyond words to see you safe. This human saved my life," Sivillith replied without taking her eyes off the departing stretcher. "He is to receive the finest medical care in the Empire, and I want constant updates on his condition." "Of course, Your Majesty," the officer said with obvious surprise. "Is there anything else?" "Yes," Sivillith said. "I want to know everything about his species." The officer looked confused but nodded. "Everything, Your Majesty. Everything," she repeated. "Their history, and their culture, and their wars, and their beliefs, and everything that makes them what they are." She had ruled for 3 centuries and thought she understood the galaxy, but today, a single human soldier had shown her that she understood nothing at all. Humans were small and fragile, and their technology was primitive, and their civilization was young. But they had something that the ancient races of the galaxy had lost long ago. They had fire, and Sivillith found herself wanting to understand it, not as an empress studying a lesser species, but as a woman who had witnessed something remarkable. The medics worked on Marcus for 3 hours before they stabilized his condition. He had lost enough blood to kill most humanoids twice over, but somehow he was still alive. Somehow he was still fighting. Just like he had promised. Sivillith sat outside the medical bay and waited. She told herself it was because he was valuable and because she owed him a debt. But deep down she knew the truth was more complicated than that. Deep down she knew that something had changed on that frozen moon, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Marcus woke up in a room that looked like it cost more than his entire yearly salary. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that shifted colors slowly from blue to gold to silver. The bed beneath him was softer than anything he had ever felt, and the air smelled faintly of flowers he could not identify. He tried to sit up and discovered that his body was wrapped in bandages and medical patches. Everything hurt, but the pain was distant, like it was happening to someone else. "You are awake," a voice said from somewhere to his right. He turned his head and saw Empress Sivillith sitting in a chair beside his bed. She was wearing formal robes of deep purple and gold, and her silver-blue skin seemed to glow in the soft light. She looked nothing like the prisoner he had dragged through tunnels and across frozen wastelands. She looked like what she was, the ruler of an empire. "How long was I out?" Marcus asked. 3 days, she replied. "Your injuries were severe, and the doctors were not certain you would survive. Takes more than a few plasma burns to kill me." "Apparently so." She studied him with those strange golden-flecked eyes, and Marcus felt suddenly uncomfortable. "Is there something wrong, Your Majesty?" "No," she said. "I was simply confirming something for myself." "Confirming what?" "That you are as stubborn awake as you were while unconscious." Marcus laughed and immediately regretted it when pain flared through his chest. "The doctors tell me you should make a full recovery," Sivillith continued. "Though it will take several weeks. I have had worse," Marcus said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. "I doubt that very much." She stood and walked to the window, which looked out over a vast nebula of swirling colors. "You are aboard my flagship," she explained, "the Eternal Dawn, and we are currently in orbit around the Dominion capital world. Long way from Vethkar Prime." "Indeed," She turned back to face him, and her expression was unreadable. "There will be a ceremony tomorrow," she said, "to honor those who participated in my rescue." "I am not really the ceremony type," Marcus replied. "Nevertheless, you will attend," Sivillith said. "That is not a request." "Yes, Your Majesty." She nodded and left without another word. Marcus lay back against his pillows and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The next day, medical staff helped him dress in a formal uniform that someone had apparently made specifically for him. It was similar to his Marine dress uniform, but with elements that matched Dominion style. He felt ridiculous, but he did not complain. They escorted him through corridors of impossible beauty to a massive throne room that made him feel very small. Thousands of aliens filled the chamber, representing dozens of species from across the Dominion. They all turned to look at him as he entered, and Marcus had never been more uncomfortable in his life. He was led to a position at the front of the crowd, facing a raised platform where the imperial throne floated. On a disk of crystalline light, Sivla sat upon the throne in full ceremonial regalia, with a crown of living starlight on her head. She looked like a goddess from ancient human mythology. Marcus suddenly understood why her people had followed her for 3 centuries. Citizens of the Dominion. Her voice rang out across the chamber, amplified by technology he could not see. "We gather today to honor those who risked everything to restore your Empress to her throne." The crowd murmured with approval. Many brave soldiers gave their lives in this effort, and they will not be forgotten. She paused, and her eyes found Marcus in the crowd. "But there is one individual whose actions exceeded all others, and one individual who stood alone against impossible odds to ensure my survival." "Oh no," Marcus thought. Sergeant Marcus Cole of Earth stepped forward. The crowd parted around him, and Marcus walked toward the throne, feeling every eye in the room upon him. Stopped at the base of the platform and waited. "You have done what none of my own people could accomplish," Sivillith announced. "You returned me to my throne when all seemed lost, and the Dominion owes you a debt that cannot be measured in currency or territory." "Just doing my job, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, "and that is precisely why what follows is necessary." She rose from her throne and descended the steps toward him. The crowd held its breath. By ancient law, a life debt to the eternal throne can only be repaid in one of 2 ways. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Death," Sivillith continued, "or union." The silence in the throne room was absolute. "I am sorry," Marcus said. "Did you say union?" "Marriage, Sergeant Cole," Sivillith replied, and her voice carried no emotion he could read. "By saving my life, you have earned the right to stand beside me, or to refuse and accept execution for the presumption of touching the imperial person without permission." That does not seem like much of a choice. It is not meant to be. Marcus stared at her, and for just a moment he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, something that contradicted her formal words, uncertainty perhaps, or hope. "The ceremony will take place in 3 solar cycles," she continued. "You may of course attempt to flee, but I should warn you that I am not accustomed to losing what I have claimed." The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. An alien empress marrying a human was unprecedented, was unthinkable, and was madness. But as Marcus looked into Sivillith's eyes, he understood something that the crowd did not. She had planned this. Every word and every gesture had been calculated, and somewhere beneath the imperial mask, she was waiting for his answer with genuine uncertainty. "Your Majesty," Marcus said loud enough for the entire chamber to hear, "I accept." The whispers became a roar of shock and outrage and disbelief. But Sivillith simply smiled. That was the first real smile he had seen from her. "Then it is done," she said. "Let the preparations begin." She turned and ascended back to her throne, leaving Marcus standing alone in a sea of stunned faces. He had expected a medal, maybe a commendation letter and a pat on the back. Instead, he was going to marry an alien empress. His mother was going to have questions. Lot of questions. The wedding of Empress Sivillith and the human soldier Marcus Cole was the most watched event in galactic history. 3 billion beings tuned in to witness what most considered either a brilliant political move or complete insanity. Marcus stood it. The altar in robes that weighed more than his combat armor, and tried not to look as terrified as he felt. Sivillith walked toward him down an aisle of living light, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony lasted 4 hours and involved rituals he did not understand in languages he did not speak. But when it was over and the crowds had cheered and the broadcasts had ended, he found himself alone with his new wife in her private chambers. "You did not have to accept," Sivillith said as she removed her ceremonial crown. "You did not give me much of a choice," Marcus replied. "There is always a choice, and you could have fled, and I would not have had you killed, despite what I said." "I know." She looked at him with surprise. "You knew. You are many things, Your Majesty, but you are not cruel, and I saw it in your eyes when you made the announcement. And yet you stayed." "I stayed." Sivillith sat down on a couch that probably cost more than a starship, and Marcus sat across from her. "Why?" she asked. It was the same question she had asked on the frozen moon, and Marcus gave her a different answer than before. "Because I have been watching you for 3 days, and I have been listening to the way you speak to your people, and the way you handle the pressure of ruling an empire at war. And what did you see? Someone who is tired," Marcus said. "Someone who has been alone for a very long time, and someone who saw something in me that made her take an enormous risk." Sivillith was quiet for a long moment. "I have outlived everyone I ever loved," she finally said. "My parents and my siblings and my children and my grandchildren and everyone who knew me before I became this." She gestured at the chamber around them. "Before I became a symbol instead of a person. And now you have married a human who will also die long before you." "Yes." "Then why?" "Because in that tunnel when you were bleeding and broken, you looked at me and spoke to me like no one has in centuries," she said. "You did not see an empress or a goddess or a political asset, and you saw a person who needed help, and you helped me." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That is just how humans are," he said. "We do not really care about titles or ancient bloodlines, and we care about what people do not, what they are supposed to be. That is terrifying to someone like me. Probably, and refreshing." Marcus smiled. "I can work with refreshing." The months that followed were not easy. The galaxy reacted to the marriage with everything from outrage to fascination to mockery. Some called it a political masterstroke that bound humanity permanently to the dominion. Others called it an embarrassment that lowered the dignity of the eternal throne. Marcus ignored all of it, focused on learning his new role and understanding the empire he had married into. He attended council meetings and studied Dominion history and tried to figure out where a human soldier could actually be useful. It turned out the answer was everywhere. "Your tax policy on the outer colonies is going to cause a revolt," he told Sivillith one evening as they reviewed economic reports. "I have ruled for 3 centuries, she replied. "I think I understand how to manage my empire. 3 centuries of doing it the same way, and maybe that is the problem." She wanted to argue. She wanted to dismiss his opinion as the ignorance of a primitive species. But something stopped her. "What would you suggest?" she asked. Instead, Marcus explained his ideas about reducing the burden on struggling colonies while increasing investment in their infrastructure. It was basic economics by human standards, but it was revolutionary to a dominion that had done things the same way for millennia. Sivillith implemented his suggestions within a year. The outer colonies had stabilized and productivity had increased across the board. The advisors who had mocked the human consort began to pay attention. "Your perspective is valuable," Sivillith admitted one night as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the capital city. "I just see things differently," Marcus replied. "That is all." "No," she said. It is more than that, and you are not afraid to challenge me when you think I am wrong, and you do. Not tell me what I want to hear. Would you prefer if I did? Never. She reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. They had started as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but somewhere along the way something had changed. They had become partners, and then something more. Did not choose you simply because of the life that Sivalith confessed. I chose you because you treated me as no one else would dare. I treated you like a person. Exactly. Marcus squeezed her hand. You know, I'm going to die long before you, he said. Humans only live about a century if we are lucky. I know. And that does not bother you. It terrifies me, she admitted. But I have spent 3 centuries being safe and being alone, and I would rather have 50 years with someone who sees me than another millennium with no one. Marcus turned to face her. Then let us make them the best 50 years this galaxy has ever seen. She smiled that real smile he had seen only a handful of times. Agreed. The galaxy would never be the same, eh? Humans sat beside the eternal throne and advised an empire of 300 star systems. The shattered sun was eventually defeated and peace returned to the Dominion, and the story of the soldier who rescued an Empress and won her heart became legend. But Marcus never thought of himself as a legend. Was just a stubborn human who had refused to quit, and an alien Empress who had been brave enough to reach for something different. Together, they proved that the universe was bigger than anyone had imagined, and that sometimes the most unlikely connections become the strongest bonds. Their story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.